most underappreciated things. I think, the things we do for our children when no one's watching. It's easy.
Yeah.
Like you go on my Instagram, you go on my TikTok, you see like me and my boys out on the boats or hiking or camping or whatever. It's the stuff that when no one's watching, like when like your son or your daughter's going through something hard and the pain that we feel, right? Because we can't be vulnerable. We can't be, sad. We can't be, we're that rock that changes the flow of the stream, like we have to be that.
Welcome to the Dad Cartel podcast. I'm excited to bring you conversations with great dads from across the country. Please follow the Dad Cartel on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok if you found value in this episode, and please share it with other dads that you may know to help create a great dad culture. If you're interested in participating as a guest, please email me at prouddad@dadcartel.com. Today, I'm joined by Danny. Hey, welcome, Danny.
Hey, man, how you doing?
Good, man. Good. You were one of the people that reached out to me, posted a TikTok video, and I've been posting a lot of content, but I said I really need to have conversations with more dads. And so far, it's only been a handful, and you were one of the guys that responded, and I'm super excited. What was it about the video or Dad Cartel or anything that I've said that has kind of made you want to step in here and share your experiences?
Well, I think it's just, being that I'm a father, single dad of 3, I know just the importance and how critical it is for dads to be involved. And so when I see something like this, it always hits close to home. I have enough young men in my life, whether it's my boys or their friends, that, either have great role models, people around them or lack thereof. And there's a huge difference between the two. So, I tend to kind of own that and bring those guys in. I've always coached, young athletes from a very young age, for the vast majority of my adult age. And, so when I see that, it just, it's always something I want to be involved in because, again, I know the importance of having strong role models around and people that, they can look up to or rely on or lead a great example. And so that's really what made me kind of jump in.
Awesome. That's beautiful to hear. So tell us about your dad origin story. How did you become a dad? What was it like for you? What was that whole experience like?
Well, my firstborn, actually, he just turned 17 on the 24th. So,
Awesome.
And shipped him out to, he went out to Vegas, hung out with some friends. And really what it was, I was married for roughly about a year. And, we tried, to have our first, and took about a year, but, ultimately, there along came Cody, and it goes by Coda. He loves his music and everything. He's a special young man. And, it was just one of those things where when it happens, it happens. It's nothing you're really prepared for. You think you are, but you're not. But when it comes and ultimately it's there, it's just something you just kind of like just organically slide into. You're a father now. Your priorities shift. Everything just kind of abruptly changes, and it's kind of it's very you can't really be too proactive about it. I know it's people who think that they're they're gonna be a dad, like I'm gonna be this kind of dad, that kind of ddad. You don't know what kind of dad you're gonna be. It's just you react to it. And so so he was my first of 3, but it was one of those things where I just kind of like looked at it and said, this is the most important thing in the world. And you have to approach it as such, and I feel like I have. And he's just an amazing young man, but just being a part of their lives, every step of the way, is such an amazing thing. And so I was just just kind of get thrown into it, man, and you react to it.
Yeah. What were your expectations? I know going into it, I knew I was going to be tired as a dad, but I really didn't understand until I felt the level of tired. I tell people I have like a baseline of tired, like it's just perpetual tired. So what were your expectations going in, and what were they after you kind of had some of that experience?
Well, the expectations were, you're going to be like Disneyland dad, right? You're just going to like have fun with it. And, you're going to, play ball with him and all this kind of stuff. But then you realize, no, there's a lot of cooking dino nuggets. There's a lot of, all the tedious things, making food and all that kind of stuff. But never so much as like the exhaustion part of it. It was always just one of those things where, just the little things that crop up that you don't think of, like you're
Mhm.
working on a school project now. I can't tell you
Yeah.
how many like B's and A's and C's that I probably got, post school from his school. But you kind of just get thrown in different things, driving kids around,
Mhm.
when they're really little, carrying a diaper bag. Like I
Mhm.
got to the point where I came up with this kind of system where I saw these dads carrying diaper bags, and I was like, to hell with that. Like what I'm going to
Yeah.
do, I put a little backpack on my kid and put all his
Yeah.
diaper stuff in his backpack, and I had him humping around.
Nice.
And I
There you
was like,
go. Nice.
you know,
We pull our own weight in this family.
yeah,
Nice.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I actually have I have a tactical baby bag, I think it's called, and it's basically, based off of what the military uses, and it has kind of the same kind of materials. It's pretty cool, but I have some patches for it and that type of thing. But I'm like, if I'm ever going to be in the situation where I'm not with my wife and I'm carrying a diaper bag, I want it to at least look kind of cool. So I don't know. That's just me.
That's how I
But
roll,
no,
man.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what was there's a lot of talk about men and dads being the main contributors, financial contributors, right? That's pretty well understood. There's high expectations on men to be the financial contributors. So what other contributions do you think dads can make besides financial, right? I think financial's implied, but non-financial contributions.
100% is just time. Time is the most valuable thing in the world. I think
Mhm.
I've posted on my TikTok or on my Instagram this thing about time and how valuable it is. That's something you
Yeah.
just can never get back. There's a monetary, there's something, there's only that financial piece that's tied to your kids. And my ex-wife, I mean, she's never worked a day in her life. While we're married, she didn't work, and then post divorce, I mean, she never worked. So
Mhm.
um you kind of get away from that. You realize that at the end of the day you're scratching a check for X,
Yeah.
but that doesn't change anything with your relationship with your kids. What does, or what improves that, or what strengthens that, or what can change that is your time.
Mhm.
And I mean, and we have a finite amount of it. And
Yeah.
so if your priorities aren't straight and you're spending your time elsewhere and you're involved in all these other different things and you're not involved there, then that's where that will, your relationships there will struggle, and you won't be there to influence them or to coach them through this life. And it's a messy life. There's so many different things and variables and these all these different you know struggles that these young people go through, and they're going to
Yeah.
need somebody that's been through it and rely
Yeah.
on your experience, or else they're going to try to touch that stove, not to find out if it's hot. It's like, I already touched it, I know it's hot, let me talk to you about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So it's all about time, man. Like at the end of the day, like, I know a lot of fathers get carried away with, what that support number looks like. I mean, that hits their
Yeah.
paycheck or whatever. Ultimately, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what that looks like at all. At the end of the day, you
Yeah.
can be writing zero, or it could be $5,000 a month. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
between your son and yourself, or your daughter and yourself. It really just
Mhm.
comes down to, they don't care. They don't even, oftentimes don't even know what it is that you're paying, but they know
Yeah.
how much time and how much attention that you're paying, and that's what truly matters.
Yeah, that's a great point. Time, and one thing we've touched on before on the dad cartels, like being present and with the time, right? Too. It's some people just write it off of, I'm gonna be there, and I've had my kids for every weekend or whatever it may be, right? But if you're not actively using that time and being present in that moment, and some people only get a weekend, right? Some people get more time, some get less, but trying to maximize that time and actually be aware and not being on your phone and not doing other things and trying to give your undivided attention as much as possible, I think that goes such a long way, right? Especially for those people that have a finite, very finite amount of time with their kids.
Yeah, and the ones that have that, like maybe a weekend or whatever, it's like, when you're not with them, what are you doing with your time? Because there's things that
Yeah.
we can do as men to take advantage of whatever
Yeah.
situations in life to get more time.
Yeah.
And I know fathers that started off with a weekend or a couple weekends or whatever, and they worked their
Yeah.
asses off, and the next thing you
Yeah.
know, they got now they've got 50-50 or whatever. So it's
Yeah.
also, when you're not present with them, where is your time directed? And if it's directed towards getting more time with them, you will get it, but you just got to put
Yeah.
the work in.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I have quite a few family members that are in that particular situation where they're trying to claw more time back, right? They're in a custody dispute and they're trying to, they're struggling to get the weekends, they're struggling to get anything past that and even sticking to agreements. What are some, if you have experience with it, what are some of the challenges there that you would, any type of advice you'd give on those challenges of trying to get more rights?
Well, I'm not too familiar with that as far as having to try to get more rights, but I do know that they give, these fathers, the men that I know, they give them kind of like a roadmap of how to get there. And it really is just kind of like you got to plan the work the plan. You just
Yeah,
got to do it. You just got to do it. And
yeah,
oftentimes, I don't know what reasons why fathers would have less time than others, but I
right.
know, there's a multitude of them. But
Mhm.
whatever it was to get there, you just have to unwind that. You have to do things differently. You have to make lifestyle changes, or maybe get your finances up, or
Yeah.
maybe improve your overall situation, whatever it may be. But I mean,
Mhm.
it shouldn't be a mystery, really. You'll
Yeah,
know why. You will know why you don't have that extra time, and you just have to
yeah,
do things differently to get it back.
yeah, that's a great point. So, what are your thoughts on the role of protector as a dad? I think there's an inherent kind of characteristic in men that we are protectors. How does that change when you become a dad from your perspective?
I think it's ratcheted up precipitously.
Yeah.
You get to that point where you're kind of like, these people are my people.
Mhm.
This is my family. And if you're the masculine protector type, then you absolutely understand one basic fundamental is that ultimately anything that goes through this family goes through you first. And it doesn't have to be like an intruder type of situation. It could be anything. If you have a daughter, it could be other young men, it could be whatever it
Mhm.
is. But ultimately, the greatest protection we provide for our children, honestly, is
Mhm.
the confidence that we instill in them to be able to
Mhm.
not be taken advantage of. Have those
Yeah.
conversations with them to where they know who they are and they have that sense of person. They get who they are, they have their values set, they have their
Mhm.
their self-confidence. Because the worst places I've seen children or young people be hurt is not
Mhm.
through violence, it's through like other people, whether it's like bullying or taking advantage of them or those types of
Yeah.
things. And you can be proactive about that just by making sure that that young person is strong and they kind of see those things. They're a little bit more streetwise about it. And
Yeah.
and all that just comes from just having a that strong influence in their life to just let them just kind of teach them the ropes. And so part of
Mhm.
protection is like, and I don't care like if you're like me and you carry guns and
Mhm.
you can handle yourself, you do like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, great. The odds of someone walking to my house, slim to none. And if they
Yeah.
did, I'm the most excited about it. I'm like, you're calling
Yeah.
911 before
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
calling 911 before I do. Like,
That's
let's have some fun. It's the things that you worry about as a parent is like, what's
yeah.
going on in their personal life? Like, are they okay? Are there people, mistreating them and this and that? And the only way to
Mhm.
combat that is make sure that they are just strong and strong young individuals. And that's the best
Yeah.
protection you can provide, really, honestly, because that's where they get hurt the most and they're most vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of that has to do with leading by example, right? What are the things that you accept as a dad, and they see that, right? Kids see everything, whatever age, right? Starting from when they're toddlers all the way up to when they're close to adulthood. But I think leading by example and showing that you as a dad don't tolerate bullying in any kind of capacity, and that way that translates to them too. And I think you're spot on, man. Where we have to give kids confidence and we have to instill that confidence in there because we can't be there forever, right? We can't always be around. You mentioned a couple things like for my wife, for instance, I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I carry pretty much every day, if I'd say 99.99% of the time, but I'm not always there, and my wife's going to be with our kids sometimes alone, and our kids will be alone eventually, right? And I always think about that, and I want them to be prepared for those situations, right? Be aware of their surroundings to know the how to judge someone's intent, and how to understand who you can potentially trust, neighbors and friends and family members, things like that. where they can go for safety. I think all of that's important. And I think it starts by showing the example of, well, this is how I conduct myself, and this is what you can model your behavior after, right?
100%. What's funny is I have a lot of conversations with different people, like, whether it's in the dating world, you talk to a lot of like single moms, right?
Mm,
And oftentimes, they get these conversations of like guys that they've dated. And there's a saying, it's I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it says something like, when a clown moves into a palace, he doesn't become king. The kingdom
mm,
becomes a circus, right?
mm,
And I always would tell them, I was like, the men that you allow in, like, and they, oftentimes have daughters, and that you
yeah.
tolerate, they witness that and they see that, and they're going to
Yep.
do the same. Like,
Hmm.
as soon as you start putting the brakes on some of this stuff, like our young people around us, they are constantly watching us and what we're doing and what we tolerate. Like
Hmm.
you mentioned, that tolerance. And that's so important. Like, as soon as you get to the point where you're kind of like zero tolerance for this or that, then that's how your kids are. But when they witness us tolerate certain things, they will too. So it's like hard to build
Hmm.
these strong young people. And like relating back to like some of these women is like, when your daughter sees you tolerating this type of man, guess what? She's going to do the same. And if you care about her and you
Yeah.
want this strong, young, independent woman, guess what? You're not helping her.
Hmm.
You can coach her as much as you want on whatever
Yeah.
you want to tell her. But when she sees you do that, she's going to be like, that's the way the game is played. That's the way it goes. And that's what I'm going to do too. So like what
Yeah.
they see is way more important than what we say.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So what do you think about what do you think the balance of responsibilities when it comes to kids is like? What is it like for dads? What do you think dads excel at, and what do you think is, something that we probably should take a backseat to moms on?
you know Certainly we lead with like the discipline side of things, like, being a disciplinarian. That's incredibly important.
Yeah.
I have my faith, right? And so
Hmm.
the hardest times I've gone through, and I don't think many have gone through a lot of what I've been through, but in those times you kind of realize, like, that's where kind of God steps in and says, hey, I'm correcting you because I
Hmm.
care about you and I love you.
Yeah.
It's easy to get like frustrated and angry with like your situation and like what's going on, but when you realize the bigger picture is that like you're cared for and that you're being corrected because someone cares, because the worst thing you can do is neglect. Neglect is
Yeah.
the ultimate sign that you just don't care about anyone at all.
Yeah.
So like when it comes to your children, if they're messing up, or they're not on the right path, or you can see improvement, you as a father, you
Hmm.
have to step in and create that and make that correction, because you're showing them
Hmm.
ultimately that's why that, like, here's me caring. And mothers, I'm not taking anything away from mothers. I know that mothers can be disciplinarians too, but there's something about a father stepping in and getting them realigned and saying, in the best way possible. You don't want to be that one that comes down iron fist or whatever, but you
Yeah.
have to be the one that corrects them. And then ultimately, as young men, we always come back to the same thing. Dad's just strict or whatever. But as we
Yeah.
become adult men, I've had conversations with so many adult men where it's like, the ones that are total messes in life are like, man, my parents kind of let me get away with anything. I really wish I had
Yeah.
more structure. And the
Yeah.
ones that got their shit together are the ones who were like, man, I was beaten with I was told to pick a
Yeah.
switch off the tree and I got my ass
Yeah.
kicked. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And they appreciate it, you
Yeah.
know. So that's the front seat for us as men. Where we need to take that back seat is that nurturing side, where we're not the greatest at nurturing. Like, it's just a motherly instinct, the thing that we will just
Hmm.
can never rival, right? That's a beautiful thing
Hmm.
about mothers, is that they carry these young ones in their womb, and then they give birth to them, and then they nurse them and they bring them up, and even though that's very physical, then the nurturing aspect of that continues on throughout that person's life, right? Like, they're
Yeah.
better at it. We can't be the nurturer and that one plus the one
Hmm.
that comes down and creates correction. So it's two
Yeah.
separate types of love that a child gets to experience: is the nurturing, loving, part of the mother that kind of grows them and actually physically gets them where they need to be, and the one of the father that guides them in the right direction. And then they'll see that there's two separate types of love there: the one that's very much like the mother's love, and then the father's love that's like, hey, I love you enough to keep you on the right path because I care about your future, I care about your life. You know,
Mhm.
if either one of those are stripped away from a child, they're absolutely doomed.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a yin and yang, right? You need both to really
Hmm.
to really be successful. And I get so many. I post videos on this too, and the typical response I'll get is, I was raised by my mom on my without a dad, and I'm perfectly fine. And a lot of that kind of messaging, and it's not to say, I was basically raised the same way. I was basically raised by just my mom, and that's not to say that you're not successful or whatever it may be. But if these people, and I say this because I was honest with myself, if these people are honest with themselves, would they be better off with their dad in their lives, and a dad who was present and who was able to instill all these different things that only a dad can? The answer should be yes. I would say everyone should really think about that, and I think you'll find that yes, you would be better off. So, it's not to take away from moms or single moms or whatever it may be, right? But to your point, I think having both is the ideal situation. And however that looks, whatever type of teamwork or effort is involved, whether they're together or not, I think it's important to try, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not a catch-all. I mean, there's always, there's it's all case sensitive, and it's very
Yeah.
much, I mean,
Hmm.
everybody's going to have their different experiences. And sometimes it's best that the father isn't involved, or sometimes it's best the
Right.
mother isn't involved. Like the absence of
Yeah.
that parent is so much better than their presence, right? So
Right.
you have those, but the way we're built as humans, like the way God made us
Mhm.
in our needs, and in the way we grow the most efficiently, is that
Mhm.
you have those two sides, right? And there's certain
Yeah.
things that the mother has that you cannot ever take away from her, that a dad cannot
Yep.
replace, and vice versa. But
Right.
again, I mean, it doesn't mean that, like you're going to be broken, you're going to be the worst person on the planet because you don't have, either or. But like you
Hmm.
said, the most ideal situation is that you have those two. And then, like with co-parenting, like I know some very successful co-parents, they hate each other, but the
Right.
mother does a phenomenal job, the father does a phenomenal job, and they're very present, and they handle their responsibilities with those children on their, their respective times. But so I mean, there's different ways to make it work, but yeah, like you said, it really comes down to what's ideal versus what's
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah, it was funny when you mentioned that some people, definitely needed the discipline of getting spanked. I thought back in my childhood, and my mom constantly apologizes for hitting me with basically what you said, whatever you could potentially find, a belt or whatever it is. And I'm like, you don't need to apologize. I needed it. I'm being honest with you. I needed it at the time. So,
Yeah.
sometimes it's necessary, and I know now it's more frowned upon, and I'm not advocating for that, but discipline, I think, is absolutely essential in some shape or form.
Oh,
But
absolutely, man. Like I grew up on a 26-acre Morgan horse ranch. I'm from the country. Like, I mean,
yeah,
as cowboys you can get. We had
yeah,
weeping willow trees. And
nice.
my mom would just say, go pick a switch. And we'd have to pick a switch off of a willow tree, give it to her, and see whip our ass with that. So um, at the end of the day, like, I mean, I mean, I don't, it's, as far as like how you discipline your child one way or another, I mean, it's everyone has their different ways of doing it, but
Hmm.
I mean, there is a reason why there is spanking. It works.
Yeah,
Just gonna say,
yeah,
dads, it works.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes it might be needed. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, nice. So, well, who served as a dad role model for you? Was it your own dad? Was it a family member? Was it, I mentioned it quite a bit, but sometimes you can model behavior off of people you may not even know, right? A neighbor or someone on TV, right? It might be even a fictional person. Who was that role model for you?
My parents, they've been married for like 50 years. So my dad was always, my dad. But the one thing that's interesting is that my dad was a businessman as well. And
Mhm.
he owned a very successful business. And that was kind of where like his mind and his efforts and everything were at. So
Mhm.
even though like as far as involved as I have been with my sons, like I've taught my sons how to shoot basketballs. All three were like classic basketball players and phenomenal football players. I threw balls with them all the time. They're all like, stud running backs and all that kind of stuff. I never once threw a ball with my dad.
Mhm.
He was more of that provider type where, yeah, we had the ranch, we had the nice cars and boats and things like that.
Mhm.
So, what I did learn from him was, the provider aspect and like how to, approach business and how to, be that. But as
Yeah.
far as like the actual like father influence where he'd come in my room and sit down and chat with me and talk with me, check in with me the way I do with my boys, I actually never had that, to be honest with you. It was just he was so much more involved with, business.
Mhm.
And myself in business, like I've always been incredibly, successful in any business that I've approached, anything that I've done in the business world. I've done much better than I deserve.
Mhm.
So I know I took things away from him in that regard, but it was kind of one of those things where I think that having that hybrid type of a environment where he was there, but then we weren't doing those things. I kind of understood what I lacked, and I understood what I wanted. And you ask any three of my boys, like we had these games where for hours in the living room, they would actually run little routes in our living room. I'd throw footballs and they try to intercept it from each other. We'd be out shooting basketballs and me just shagging balls for hours. If I shot my own
Nice.
shot, they would yell at me. I was just there to rebound and kick it back out to them.
Nice.
And they run in little routes. I've coached probably 50 different teams between basketball, flag football, tackle football. Just always just being that in just because I knew that I didn't have that, and so it was kind of, when I look back at it, it was kind of the most awkward kind of a, father son type of a situation where you're there, but you're not. And then so I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to pick up the slack where I felt like there was slack in my life. And so,
Yeah, that's a great point. It's trying to learn from, what do I feel is missing from my childhood, right? And what can I add, right? We're constantly, I think it's an evolutionary type of thing, right? Where we're trying to do better than the last generation in some way, right? And
yeah.
it's, that everyone does the best they can. And I think, hindsight's always 2020, but it's trying to learn from the mistakes of others, I think is really powerful. And it might not even be mistakes. It might just be opportunities, right? Opportunities that they didn't capitalize on. What could I do? What could I have take advantage of that they maybe didn't, right? And I think that's something I'm constantly thinking about and trying to implement my own parenting. And that's this is me being 10 weeks into having a daughter, so I mean I have a lot of time to figure that out. But
You certainly do.
yeah. So you mentioned coaching quite a bit. Tell me about that. How do you what is that like for you? What do you see in some of the kids that you coach? And what's a big takeaway, I think that or what's a big takeaway that you think from sports for kids?
So I have a sister who got pregnant at like 16, had a son at 17. So I was like a 7-year-old uncle. And so he grew up without a father. So when I graduated high school, I was like 18 years old. I got my first coaching job coaching Michael Christopher, my nephew. And I loved it. I fell in love. So I got into it a lot earlier than other people do because most of the times, it's the dad's stepping in to coach while I was stepping in to coach my nephew. And then it was so I fell in love with it then. And then fast forward to when I had my own sons and they were like able to play sports. There's always a shortage of people wanting to volunteer their time to coach, and a lot of them don't really have the capacity to or the knowledge to. And when it comes to basketball and football, like I know those two sports and how to coach them extremely well. I played them high level my whole life, and then coached them, when I was a lot younger. And so I'd only step in. And the one thing for me is that there's the dads that like to coach the sport to have control, and then there's the dads that like to coach the sport to kind of raise the water levels so all boats rise. So you have like, you get to watch the growth of all these young players and see them from the
Mhm.
beginning of the season to the end of the season, their confidence growth, their physical
Yeah.
growth, and just overall just their bonds with their teammates. And that's where
Mhm.
I always really love to be. And so, if you ask any players that played for me, they're always like, Coach Danny was like the most fun. They learn a lot from me, but I was never that kind of coach that cared too much about, what they do at the youth level because I know there's
Yeah.
so much more ahead. I played with incredible athletes that never went anywhere, and
Yeah.
so, I would never get carried away with like my own sons. Like I have one of my sons who's a phenomenally gifted running back. This kid would rush for couple thousand yards a season. And we were on this wing tee. I mean, he would get, double digit touchdowns every season, you know, but never get too carried away with it. Like people would be like, he's
Mhm.
a stud, he's this, he's that. I'm like, well, I played with like Luke Staley, who won the Doak Walker Award at BYU and played for the Detroit Lions, right?
Mhm.
He played for like 2 seasons there. Like, you
Yeah.
understand that, like, at the end of the day, what's the most important is the kids are having fun, the kids are
Yeah.
being supported, and but you're also coaching them what they need to be successful out there on the field and be safe out there, because you
Yeah.
coach them wrong and you don't take it seriously, they get their head blown off out there, and then next thing you know, you got a kid that just doesn't want to play ever again because he was put in a bad situation. So I was always mindful
Yeah.
of my players, but the development of them as young people, because there's so many analogies that exist between like the business world or the real world and the sports world.
Mhm.
Teamwork, getting along with your teammates. You might not like a teammate, but you got to play with them. You're a cog within the system. So I'd always make sure that the type of coaching that I did is I'd relate as much real world to them during the practices and the games that we had. If it was a tough game or a game we won, like how to handle success, how to handle failure, because I'd
Mhm.
always want to make sure that they understood, like, this might be just something that you're doing for fun in a game, but this
Yeah.
it relates so much to real life that take these things away, because I don't know if you're going to be the next Peyton Manning or whatever, but I do know this: you're going to go into the workforce, you're going to go into the real world. I do know that. And so you realize that it's abundantly obvious that the importance should be on what they can use in their little sports careers to further themselves in life, because there's so much more there than anywhere else. I mean, you're not going to, with as many youth athletes as I've coached, I mean, even at the younger ones, I mean, I think only maybe 4 or 5 went on to play in college, and they're like D1 AA schools. And then so that was always kind of like how I approached coaching was, how can I make you better as a person, and take some of this into life.
Yeah. I think that's important, right? It's you hit on some points of, not everyone is going to make it to the pros or even the collegiate level, but there's so many valuable lessons that you can learn: how to lose, how to persevere through adversity, fighting through injuries, fighting through mental and physical challenges, things like that that will serve you all across life, right? Not just in sports, but in the business world, in your personal relationships, and anything that you do in your everyday life. And sometimes I watch, I got to see my wife's younger brother play soccer, and it was maybe a few months ago, and they were playing a team, and the coach of the opposing team just losing his shit, just being one of those like all over the place type of coaches, and
Yeah.
run there, run that, and you can tell, I related to a lot of like martial arts type of things. Those coaches that just yell random instructions and they're not giving any type of constructive feedback are the worst by far, because they're just confusing their team even more, or their fighter, or their player, whatever it may be. And that the kids pick up on that, right? They'll see this guy's a mess, and maybe he's throwing a tantrum, and maybe he's being unprofessional or whatever it may be, and they might learn that through osmosis of, okay, well, if we're losing, it's okay to conduct myself that way, right? And there's a time and place to be passionate, and I think there's a good way to do it. But sometimes when you lose your shit like that, the kids notice that, and you would know better than I do. And I think it's important to be aware of that too.
I agree with you. One of my sons, my middle son, he had this head coach that he's now the principal of the high school. And I had this gripe with him because he was one of those guys that didn't have a lot of basketball experience, but he would constantly be yelling instruction onto the court. Now, if you
Mhm.
played basketball like I did, you understand that, like, you're playing basketball, you have a ball, you have a defender, you have all this stuff going on in front of you, and you can't, your senses kind of shut down to the point where if you're visually seeing all these things happening on the court and then someone's yelling instruction to you, okay, you
Yeah,
can't possibly process that instruction. And
yeah,
so and I've had coaches where literally they wouldn't say a word during play, small things, but this guy was constantly bombarding the court with instruction.
yeah,
And these are young athletes. I'm like, there's no way in hell they're going to be able to process that. It was almost more like so the parents can hear that he knew what he was talking about or whatever. And
yeah,
so I actually had a conversation with him, and I kind of explained it to him, that like how communication works and like what happens in those environments where your adrenaline's up, you're playing a game, and they can't process what you're saying. And I was like, and the vast majority of the stuff you're saying, that's the stuff you say in practice. And if they don't get it in practice to the point where you feel like you need to yell that out on the court, you still say nothing and you readdress it in the next practice. Is that I had to yell, slide in front of your man or hands up or whatever. You shouldn't be yelling hands up out on the court during a game. That's during practice. They should be doing that, So yeah, you gotta know, kind of like pick and choose when you get that out there, and it's usually during practice.
Yeah. What's your experience with parents coaching on the sidelines? I know in jujitsu, it's such a big problem. Like I'll go to the practices, the kids' practices are usually before the adults, and then they had to send out emails. Like the coaching staff had to send out emails and texts to the parents and to the whole academy membership saying, hey, you can't coach from the sidelines. First of all, most of you don't actually do this and have never done it. Second of all, it's confusing them because we have coaches that you're paying for to teach your kids, please don't do it. And it still happens. What's your experience with that?
I think it's incredibly toxic. I hate the parent coach thing. In our town, there's a lot of nepotism, and so you deal with these parents that, they insert their kids into these positions they have no business being in. And then they, hire all their friends to be the coach, and their kids get these positions. Like we had one kid on my son's football team that could barely throw a football. Like he was a terrible quarterback. And I think his freshman year, he was a quarterback, and there's other kids that were so much better that ended up, later on in the season, taking his position away from him, where the coaches are like, we can't deny this. Like he sucks. Let's get the other kid in, and then had a much more successful quarterback. So when you deal with like nepotism, or you deal with parents coaching or whatever, oftentimes it's that parent coaching from a position of like, it's my son, like, or my daughter or whatever, and it validates them, and that to me is the most toxic thing in the world, because really they can't sit there and let their kid go out there and success or fail on their own. Have to be involved somehow, and because it somehow reflects on them. But the child learns so much more when they success or fail on their own, right? And there's no crutch. There's no one to blame. There's no one to say, well, you didn't coach me right or whatever. So they actually take some of that development away from their own child by inserting themselves and taking some of that accountability, and so like when I've never seen really a parent coach that came in that was, so amazing that they made children that much better. But I did see many that made kids not love the game anymore. And that's the thing, is that when I was coaching in an NFL camp with JJ Burden, we had this old timer come in, and he was a coach from, I can't remember what team, like Philadelphia Eagles. So JJ played with Kansas City Chiefs and Joe Montana and all that. And him and Anthony Newman would run this NFL camp here locally. And I was selected as one of the coaches. And this old timer came in, and he was talking to all of us. Mostly were dads. Since I was a young uncle coaching my nephew, I was in the group. But he's like, I'm going to tell you guys something. Not one of you guys are paid coaches for a reason. It's because not one of you have the ability to make a child better than he already is. But every single one of you has the ability to make them never love the game again. And that stuck with me. And that was powerful, because you can turn them off, but you can't go and make them that much better, because you'd be a paid coach if you could. And so I was mindful of that. And I've seen so many parent coaches, just by ego, whatever, not knowing what they're doing, make kids be like, I hate this game. It sucks. I'm going to go do something different.
Yeah, it's a quick way to burn them out, right? And the worst situation is also when the parent has zero experience in the game, and then they're giving them bad advice. So that's confusing too, right? Because you're giving them bad technique, you're teaching them you're messing with fundamentals, you're just confusing them. And I've seen that time and time again. And it's just like, or people, I think the worst one is people trying to live vicariously through their kids, right? I wanted to be this NFL stud, I wanted to be this fighter, I wanted to be, whatever it may be, so I'm going to push my kid to the absolute limit, or I want them to go to the Olympics, that type of thing. You can't do that to kids. You need to just let them experience it, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm 6'4", I know my sons, like they have growth potential. I would see some of these dads that are like 5'8", their kid is like maybe a center, like, he might be the biggest kid on the team, and and he's dominating. And that dad gets carried away, and I'm like, you realize he might be full grown right now. Like, let's not
Yeah.
let's not get ahead of ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
genetics are a thing,
Hmm.
and you just kind of realize, like, yeah, I mean, you can coach bad technique, you can live vicariously through them, and you see that all the time, but ultimately you see those kids actually are the ones that get affected by it the most, and don't go as far as maybe they could. Who's to say they're going to go far at all? But could they
Hmm.
have gone further? Likely.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So pivoting back to being a dad, what do you think is one of the more underappreciated things about being a dad?
But I think, like, I don't think a lot of people understand, like, how hard it hits us, or how much we hurt, or how much, like, even in private you may cry about, like, the things that your
Mm.
child goes through,
Yeah.
and having young men, I'm a super emotional father. Like, my
Hmm.
son goes through something tough, like, it hits me hard,
Yeah.
and it's easy to be like, okay, that's that dad, like, I'm that dad, in my community at least, or anywhere else where they're like, strong guy, this and that. I'm broken down, like, pretty easily over things that, like, any of my sons may go through. And like, when I divorced their mother, so I filed for divorce. It was a tough situation, and it was the hardest part of it was, like, how my sons were going to go through this, right?
Yeah.
And then they've done incredibly well. Like, I will tell you right now, we did a phenomenal job building strong young men. Like, they just, going through it and everything was just phenomenally well. But, like, you know, I think that a lot of people don't realize, like, we're not just these dads that, like, our kids can be like, hey, someone's messing with me at school, and we're like, yeah, go punch him in the face or whatever.
Right.
Like, if you truly are a father, you have that, like, you basically have that emotion, and it's tied to your child, and you kind of put yourself in their shoes, and you know how they feel, and it just affects you, and you just kind
Yeah.
of, like, that's what creates action for me. Is I'm like, okay, well, rather than go punch him in the face,
Sure.
X, Y, or Z, let's do some things and figure this out. But, like, I think that's the most
Yeah.
underrated thing, or underappreciated thing, is because, we're men, right? We're not supposed to be that way. Well, we are.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's showing that vulnerability, right? And teaching them it's okay to feel anything you're feeling, right? There's a really good video about that. I talk about it a lot. I'm into boxing and things like that, so I like Canelo Alvarez. And there was
Mhm.
a video of him, one of the baddest guys on the planet, right? Boxer. And there's a video of him with his sons, and they're in the gym, and he's hitting pads, or he's doing some work, right? And his son is already hitting pads, and I think he fell down or something, and he starts crying. And I think the other guys in the gym, typical kind of response would be like, oh, you're a boxer, you're tough, you don't cry, right? And he kind of looks at
Yeah.
them, and then so Canelo comes over and he tells his son, he's like, no, it's okay to cry, like, you're hurt right now, it's fine, like, just cry it out, it's okay to cry sometimes. And his son looks at him like with this most like endearing look, and it's like basically like you could see the like thank you in his eyes, right? And I thought that was so powerful, because here's one of the toughest guys on the planet, grew up in probably the same type of way that you and I did, where with a dad that said, like, brush it off, like, man up, that kind of thing. And he's telling me, you know what, it's okay to cry every now and then, right? When you if you need to get it out, just get it out, right? And I think there's a lot of power in that.
100%. I agree with that 100%. And you know that's kind of the other thing, is teaching our young people, like, how to be vulnerable, when and where. Like,
Yeah.
I'm learning now, going through, like, single dad dating life, like, you don't be
Mhm.
vulnerable in front of a woman ever.
Yeah.
If it's your wife, yes, like, she's
Yeah.
earned that, but you just never be vulnerable in front of them. Like, we're great with so many things as men. Like, we're very, like, driven. We have our hands on things, and this and that.
Mhm.
That's where we thrive. Women are professionals at emotion. And
Yeah.
so when you show that emotion, or you become vulnerable, now you're entering their world, where now they're dominant, right? And so you kind of, like, understand, like, they're going to look down on you in that environment. You kind of feel that way.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it'll backfire on you, like, or at least that's what I've experienced. Not with
Yeah.
everyone, but I mean, that's by and
Yeah.
large. So the other thing is teaching your children like when they can be vulnerable, when they need to be strong, because I think
Hmm.
there's a huge a huge miss on some of fathers where we don't teach our children when they should really just lock it down and gut it out. I mean, the hardest
Yeah.
things in life lead to the easiest life, right? And the easy things in
Hmm.
life lead to the hardest life. But sometimes
Yeah.
you do have to be able to check that emotion, and teaching children how to check their emotion will lead them so
Hmm.
far in this life. But
Yeah.
also teaching them like when to show that vulnerability,
Hmm.
that will reward them handsomely, because then all of a sudden
Yeah.
maybe that will build trust between them and a partner or whatever.
Hmm.
You got to let that guard down in the right time. It's a slippery slope. It's very difficult to like really like help them identify when those moments are, but through enough
Hmm.
guidance and enough experience, like they'll know it when they see it. But I think that's
Yeah.
one thing that we miss a lot, is coaching them up on emotions, when to hold them back and when to show them.
That's a great point. Again, I think it keeps going back yin and yang, right? It's knowing when to. You need both, and like you said, I think teaching them adversity is good. And you're probably like how I am, where I try to put myself in adversity when I can, because I feel like it forges you, right? It forges you into a tougher person, and it's better to find that controlled adversity where you can do this kind of controlled growth than just being thrown into it and not knowing what to do when the time comes. And I think there's a lot of power in that too, of being able to have resiliency. And it's resiliency is a skill that you can develop and definitely have to exercise, right? Because it atrophies, being resilient, if you don't face adversity at least in some capacity on a daily basis, I think, then it just you won't know what to do when the time comes. So I think that's another important part of it.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, man. Like, any aspect of life you want to grow, you got to put yourself under tension, stress, strain, whether it's in the gym. Like, you don't grow
Hmm.
unless you put yourself under heavier weights and you grind through
Yeah.
it. And you got to be consistently doing that to yourself. I don't think there's a single thing I've ever achieved in this life that it was a value that didn't come hard. Right. And so when something comes easy, there's no value in it to me. Like, there's just simply, it's just nothing of value has ever come easy for me. And so I
Mhm.
tend to look those things off. But with our children, it's in this lifestyle, or this life, these generations, like they're just taught everything comes fast, everything comes easy, and
Yeah.
you got to really teach them, what the value proposition of everything is, because
Hmm.
they're not going to want to put themselves through the same type of stress and strain like you and I prefer to do. Like, do we
Hmm.
like rolling around on a mat and getting choked out, and but you know what, at the end of the
Hmm.
day, when you're done, you kind of realize, okay, if I'm in that situation, like on the streets, I know what to do. Yeah, it totally
Yeah.
sucked that my boy was just literally choked me out and put
Hmm.
a dent in the side of my head. But guess what? I'm better for it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some of us are a little crazy, think that's fun, but we're going in the
Hmm.
gym at 44 years
Hmm.
old. At 44 years old, I have
Hmm.
like 20 somethings that are like, man, like, how do I be built like you at your age? I'm like, just do what you're
Yeah.
doing, but never stop, and just keep eating and keep training and just keep putting yourself through it. Yeah, it does it
Yeah.
suck? Do I like doing it? Hell no, I don't. I like the
Yeah.
results. I like the way I look. I like the way I feel. But
Hmm.
like, but all of that also comes from like there's like this other aspect of me that it feeds, where I'm competitive
Yeah.
with myself. Like, I literally want to
Hmm.
beat that man in the mirror every single day. And
Yeah.
so to keep that up, you have to have that in you. And that's something as fathers that, like my sons, like I had a home gym, my kids being there working out and all that kind of stuff. Like, my
Hmm.
boys are just, they have this, a lot of the same kind of genetics, but like they would witness their father getting up every morning at 5 a.m., going to the
Yeah.
gym, training, coming home and having breakfast made before they got up for school,
Yeah.
and so
Hmm.
and then they'd eat, and then I would take them to school, and then I would go
Hmm.
work all day, and then I would go pick them up from school.
Yeah.
So it's like, when it comes down to it, like, again, you can sit there and say, you need to work out, you need to train, you need to eat well, or you can prove it. And I just prefer to prove
Exactly.
it.
Yeah. Again, leading by example, right? You can say all the great things, but if they don't see you doing it, how are they going to take you seriously, right? How are they going to say, Dad told me to go work out, but they see you on the couch eating chips, right? It doesn't translate. So, you
No.
know, it is leading by example, 100%. That's awesome. What do you think it's going to take to change dad culture? What do you think dad culture is now, and what do you think it's gonna take to improve it?
You know, dad culture in my mind has changed a lot over the last couple of years, and here's why. So when I was married and I lived in our community with my ex-wife, we surrounded ourselves with families. Like that was our friend groups were all married couples and this and that, right? And so you would just see families like the kids were on the same sports teams and we went to the same school. We'd hang out, we'd drink together, and like whatever together. And so you just very much felt very like life was family. When
Mhm.
you go through divorce and then you're talking to you're hanging out with single guys that are your friends or dating single women, you start to realize there's a completely different side, right? And so
Mhm.
you start seeing like, okay, well, like these single friends of mine, like why aren't you more present as fathers? Why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you trying to do more? Or you
Mhm.
talk to these single mothers that you're dating or talking to, and they are talking about the way that their kids' fathers are. And you
Mhm.
just kind of lose faith in it because you see
Yeah.
when you're on this side of the fence that people get caught up so much in their own lives, and they get caught up in trying to find someone new, or they get caught up in trying to do whatever, that it's
Mhm.
that their relationships with their children begin to fail.
Mhm.
And and a lot of these people that I talk to, that, like, they would leave their exes because of the fact they were horrible spouses or parents, and so there's that.
Mhm.
But you just kind of get to the point where, I mean, it's a deliberate effort. You have to want to be a good dad. You have to want to love your children. You have to want to do those things, because like me jumping on this call, like either I got up and jumped on with you at 9, or I didn't. If I
Mhm.
text you back, I want to. If I email you back, I want to. If I pick up the phone, I want to. There's no
Yeah.
difference with parenting, and so
Mhm.
it's just about priorities. And that's why I think it's so valid that when children grow up without a present father that is alive, how they feel slighted, because it's like, it was your
Yeah.
decision not to talk to me, or not to be in my life, or not to do things with me and for me,
Yeah.
because as people, that's, we do what we want, and
Mhm.
so I lost a little bit of that faith in humanity, if you will, when coming
Mhm.
to this side, because like I see these guys and or talk to these women and hear about their exes, and I'm kind of like, man, like there's so much more of this than I really thought, because I
Yeah.
last 16, 17 years being married, it was just all
Mhm.
around families and everything. And I was like,
Yeah.
it's just like how I grew up. My parents were married for, like 50 years or
Yeah.
whatever. So but ultimately, as far as how I feel about the culture, I don't feel like it's really a culture. It's just a bunch of people making just decisions, and you either have it or you don't. And you can't lie to me about it. You can't sit there and tell me it's circumstantial, or my baby
Yeah.
mama won't let me do this or do that.
Yeah.
No, it's a deliberate effort. You can change
Yeah.
whatever outcome you want. You can do what you need to do. That's bullshit
Yeah.
to me. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, and I hear that all the time. Like, I'm like, man, why don't you do more with your son? Well, his mom, fuck that. His mom, at the end of the day, you have rights too. Maybe
Yeah.
you might feel like they're a little bit more uphill, but you know what, dude, you're not doing the shit you need to do to get there. And as soon as you do that, and then you still can't get there, then come talk to me about baby mom. But you haven't even taken the first step yet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's important. I think it's making excuses first and foremost is when you have kids, I feel like it doesn't matter. You figure out a way, right? Resources, whatever it may be, you find a way, right? And there's always a way, I think, for anything.
Right.
And I think it definitely is a mindset thing. But I think you hit it perfectly where people can't give up before they even start, right? Especially when it comes to your kids, because it's just completely unacceptable, and you have to try, right? And that's the only way that I think we really create change. And for me, why I really started this and started Dad Cartel was I was on the other side of the spectrum, where I grew up in Chicago, and there was basically fatherlessness everywhere, right? Everyone I knew basically either had uh, a missing dad, or a dad that was there but not really present, that type of situation. And I thought, there has to be something that's better than this. And I personally don't ever want to be that type of dad, right? So it starts with me. And then I start thinking, well, I want to improve. Who can I talk to? And I'm like, well, why don't I talk to dads, right? And how can I learn from them? Just ask questions, right? I'm learning a lot from you, so thanks, by the way. So it's powerful. I think just having conversations, just asking questions and trying to learn from one another, trying to learn from each other's mistakes, trying to learn from what worked, what didn't work, and having constant kind of communication. So for me, if I can even start a couple of conversations that will create some type of change, I think that's a huge win for me, man. That's what I'm after. Any type of takeaway that someone can have from one of our conversations, or I have a conversation with someone else or something like that, I think that's a massive win for me.
I agree, man, 100%. I would tell you, man, like, being that I was married, I had a successful marriage for 17 years. I think we were married for before I filed, and then being divorced, is that I'll tell you the one thing that is the most consistent, whether it's in divorce life or married life, is
Hmm.
the communication between the spouses. So if anyone's watching this and
Hmm.
they're a father, the
Hmm.
communication between the spouses is so incredibly important, because that's how your children learn to communicate and how they learn to communicate with others or their significant other. And you can absolutely hate this person, and you can absolutely just despise this person. You
Hmm.
can be on the infancy stages of a divorce or whatever, but like ultimately, if you continue to have good, strong, positive communication with them in front of the children, you hash your shit out in private, um,
Hmm.
you are doing them such a service, because like we had our moments where we'd have it out in front of them. And
Hmm.
and then as they get older, and now they're teenagers, like 17, 15, 13, and they can talk to you or whatever, you start to realize like
Hmm.
that was much more impactful than you think. And
Yeah.
so my advice would be to any fathers out there, young fathers, mid fathers, whatever, is that when your child is present, as much as you may be disagreeing with your wife or whoever, treat them with the most respect possible.
Hmm.
And your child will actually recognize you're not happy with them, but you're still treating them this way, and they'll
Yeah.
learn that that's the way to go about it. And then
Yeah.
because I'd have conversations with my sons where I'd be like, I'm like super not happy with your mom right now, but and they're like, wow, man, like like maybe you were better to her than deserved or whatever. I'm like, well, that's just the way we have to roll as men. And then
Yeah.
there's and then and so I think the one thing that the kids aren't stupid, like they are so intuitive and they pick up on so much. And when you actually show that example, like it goes so far with them, and they start to become much better communicators themselves. Like when operating in chaos, they're just like more like grounded. They get it. They don't have to be emotional and start yelling and arguing with people. They're just kind of like, they'll take the same approach, because they'll know if there's stress between the two of you. They'll know if there's like if you're in the midst of like some type of argument or whatever. But when they see you handling it, like, okay, I appreciate you, I understand what you're saying, I hear you, I see you, we'll talk about this later. And they're like, damn, like, dad's pissed, but dad's handling it that way. That's the way they're going to go about it. And I wish I would have done more of that. It was very spotty. But
Hmm.
I've learned there was so much value in those times where that's the approach that I took, because that's what they
Hmm.
remember, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, it's powerful. So any last things that you'd like to share with the Dad Cartel audience, dads out there? Any last wisdom that you'd like to give out?
Man, just probably the cliche stuff, like this time that you have with these young ones is so precious. And I'm going to tell
Mhm.
you, every single child, a daughter or a son, they want the best relationship with you as humanly possible. You are the greatest thing in the world until you prove that you're not. And so, like, every single morning that they wake up, they might be caught up in a cartoon or playing with something, doing whatever, but it doesn't change the way they feel about you. Like they literally, children want to be your best friend. They want to know what you're doing and what you're up to, and they want to know that you love them and you think they're the greatest thing in the world. They're going to seek that from you.
Mhm.
It's when we overlook that, and we get caught up in our other things in life and whatever. And if it goes on long enough, eventually they'll quit trying. Eventually they'll get to that point where they just go, okay, this is the way that's going to be. But if you take advantage of that, then you will have the greatest relationship with your children humanly possible. Just seizing that opportunity when they're going through those stages of life where that's the way they look at you. And I see that now looking back, like my sons, I was so thankful that I was involved as I was and playing with them and doing all the things that we did together. But like, when you see it, later on when they're teenagers, like had I missed that, I would never forgive myself. And I promise, if anyone else misses that, you won't forgive yourself.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, guys, listen to that advice. I think that's great advice. And yeah, thanks again, Danny, for jumping on. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. And I mentioned a community that I'm building. So there's a link on my TikTok that it's a Dad Cartel community. Basically, it's going to be a forum where we can share different experiences. Right, here's something that worked for me. Here's something I'm having a challenge with, and I'm hoping that it can be a place where people can ask questions and have more and more constant dialogue. So love for you to be on there and love to get some of your input on there, and it'd be fun, man. Just continue the conversation.
Absolutely, my man.